Hello everyone, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Christine Bailey and I'm going to be your teacher for this semester. We haven't met face to face yet, but I'm going to show you a few things in Illustrator today, just the basic and the workspace and how to use a couple of the tools. So you're going to start out by opening up your software, Adobe Illustrator, and your screen may be a little bit different than mine right now, depending on what version you're working with, if you have it on your personal computer or if you're working in computer lab. But either way, you're going to want to create a new document. And we're just going to talk about what a new document entails and all the things that go along with it. You'll notice that as I move my mouse around, when I click on something, it's going to turn bright pink so you can know where my mouse is on the screen. And also any key commands that I use will be at the bottom highlighted. So when you create a new document, it's always good to name your document first so that it will most likely save, kind of like an auto save, and it will be less likely for you to lose your file. So for right now, we're just going to call this practice, and we're going to use an underscore and our name. So make sure that you always put your name anywhere on your document so that I know what it is. And it's also important to maintain the same kind of format for all the files that we use in this class. So we're going to start out with just 8.5 by 11 document. So if you have it over here in your custom documents already, you can click on that. If not, you can just type in the width and the height here. And we're going to make the orientation portrait. So the width will be 8.5 and the height will be 11. You want to make sure that your document is in inches. Obviously, there are lots of other options here, but inches are our most common measurement in the US. So we're going to be using inches most of the time in class. And then you'll notice that there is an option to create a number of artboards. So artboards are what we use to work in Illustrator. It's going to be our space that we're going to work within. For each program, the space that you're going to work in is going to be named differently. So in artboards, we can have more than one, but for today, we're just going to create one artboard. Normally, if I was in class with you, I would ask if anybody knew what a bleed is. If you do, awesome. If you don't, a bleed is an area when you design beyond the edge of the page. So if you wanted something to print right to the edge of the page, you would need to have a bleed on it. That means that you design beyond the edge of the page, and then when it's printed on a larger format page, and then that page is sliced down to the final page size, which would be your 8.5 by 11. And we'll talk more about that in class when I actually see you. We're also going to choose CMYK color mode. If you don't know what that stands for, it stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. You also have the option for RGB color mode, which is red, green, and blue. And once you're finished, you're going to hit create. Sorry, my computer is working a little bit slow because I've got a lot running right now. All right, so you've got your document here. We've got our toolbar on the left. We've got our control panel on the top. And on the right-hand side, we've got our panels. All right, so all of these can be modified to any way we want it. This is called our workspace. And your workspace, if you think about if you were a painter, you would have all of your brushes in one place, your paints in another place, and your canvas in another place. And you would have that organized and set up exactly the way that you want it to be set up. So if you look at the toolbar, there are two little arrows at the top left. This allows us to collapse the toolbar into a single column or expand it into a double column. I usually look at it in a double column so that it's easier for you guys to see. So that's how you'll see how you'll see it on my screen. On the right hand side, I'm just going to get rid of this for now. You have all of your panels. Now, I may have more panels than you have currently because this is my personal program and I work in this a lot, so I have it set up the way that I like it to be set up. But you can also click on the two little arrows at the top right here, and that will expand your panels so that you can see the insides of everything in the panels, and then it'll create little tabs for panels that aren't showing. Or you can click it again and you can collapse it, and it'll give you both icons and the name of the panel. You can take this a step further and bring your mouse right to the edge, and it'll allow you to shrink down your panel so that it just shows the icon. Once you get to the point where you know which icons are which panels, then this is the perfect way to get the optimal amount of screen room. However, when you're first starting out, it's a lot easier to be able to see what the actual panel is by its name. And so this is how I'm going to display my panels for you guys whenever I'm showing you anything. And then up here at the top is our control panel. This, depending on what tool we have selected, you'll notice that the settings on our control panel switch. So this is allow us to kind of get shortcuts to certain settings when we have certain tools selected. All right. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a couple different tools. I'm going to give you a brief kind of tutorial on how to use these tools, and if you want to work along with me, you can either have this tutorial or this video open to the side and your actual program open next to me, and then you can kind of work along with me. I'm only going to introduce a few of the tools, and then I'm going to do a separate tutorial that's we're gonna create a skull and crossbones together. And I'm going to ask you guys to turn that in as your homework for our first class. So the first tool I want to talk about is our selection tool. I also refer to it as the black arrow because it is black. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to select things. So I'm just going to create a square here so that I can show you how that works. So I've created a square. If I have my selection tool, I can select it. I know it's selected because there's what's called a bounding box around the edge, and I see all of the anchor points are highlighted. So this allows me to move my shape around, so I can move things with my selection tool. I can also click on the edge and drag the corner, and that will allow me to resize my shape or my object. And then I also can hover right outside of the edge of my bounding box, and you'll notice that it gives you a curved arrow, which allows you to rotate your object. Okay, so the selection tool has three different functions. It allows you to scale, it allows you to move, and it allows you to rotate. The next tool I'm going to highlight is the direct selection tool. So just based on the name alone, you can maybe guess what the difference between the selection tool and the direct selection tool is, but this allows you to select specific points. So I can click off of my object, and then if I click on just one of my corners here, you'll notice that just that corner is dark blue and then the other ones are white. That's because just that corner is selected, which means that now if I click and drag, I can move just that single point on its own and actually change the shape entirely. I can also select multiple, so I just clicked and rubber band selected, which means that I click and drag over the area of points that I want to select, and then I can move those individually. Okay, so this tool gives you a little bit more freedom to get specific when you're working with points. So something I should cover is that Illustrator is strictly a vector-based program, and I'll go over that more when we see each other. But what that means is that it's kind of a mathematical-based program where everything is made up of points and paths. So when we're creating objects, we're not working with pixels that kind of is more like coloring in a coloring book. We're kind of almost working, if you think about it, when you were back in elementary school and you used dot to dot to make images. It's the same way we would create shapes and images in Illustrator. So I'm going to go ahead and use my selection tools to select that entire shape that I messed around with, and I'm going to delete it. All right, so the next tools, these tools down here, I'm going to skip over these and we're going to go over them when we're actually in class. The next two tools are your pen tools. These are very powerful and super precise tools, but we're going to work on that later in class. So you can expect to pretty much spend an entire week working with the pen tool. The next tool is your type tool. We're also going to skip over that and revisit it later. And the line tool is exactly what it sounds like. It creates lines. So in order to create a line, you would click and drag, and that will just create a line. Now you'll notice that this line that I created is not exactly straight. So if we wanted to create a perfectly straight line, we could hold down the shift key while we're dragging. So you'll notice that now it's a perfectly straight line. The shift key is going to be something that is going to be very important throughout our whole time working in the Creative Suite. It's going to help us to maintain proportions. It's going to help us select multiple objects, and you'll get to know very well when it's applicable. But you do want to keep in mind that the shift key is a very important key. All right, that this allows you, sorry, I clicked too many times. This allows you to select different sub tools from that original tool. So you've got, in addition to the line segment tool, you have the arc tool, the spiral tool, the rectangle grid tool, and the polar grid tool. And we'll work more with those tools later, but the line tool, you can click and drag, and that's how you're going to create lines. If you just click once, what you'll have is a little dialog box that pops up, and that actually allows you to be a little bit more specific when you're creating a line. So you can choose the actual length and the angle and the fill, but we'll talk more about that later. So if I wanted specifically a 6-inch line and I wanted it to be on a 35-degree angle, I could hit OK, and that's going to create that for me. Okay. So this is not really an object, it's just a line, which means that it's made up of 2 points and a single path. All right, so now we're going to talk about the shape tool. So the first shape tool is the rectangle tool. If you click and hold, you'll see that there's a rectangle tool, a rounded rectangle tool, an ellipse tool, a polygon tool, a star tool, and a flare tool. Now all of these have the ability to create shapes in the same basic ways. So if we choose the rectangle tool and you click and drag, that's going to create a shape from the corner that you drag to the opposing corner, so the opposite corner. Now I'm just going to delete that. If you click and drag and you hold down the shift key at the same time, what will happen is it'll create a perfect square. All right, so it'll maintain those proportions and create a perfect square, and that's when you hold down the shift key. Now, if I wanted to create, let's say, instead of going from corner to corner, I wanted to create a square from the center point of my square out to the edge, I could hold down both the Alt and Shift key and click and drag, and that's going to create a perfect square from my center point instead of creating it from my corner to corner. And then the final way to create a shape using the rectangle tool is to click, sort of like we did with the line, and you can actually type in the width and the height that you want. So if you wanted it to be a perfect square, you could type in 4x4, or if you wanted a rectangle, you could type in 4x6, and you can hit OK, and it's going to give you your dimensions exactly. So the same way we created those rectangles, you can use that same technique to create all of these other tools. Some of the differences here is when you click on the polygon tool and you click, you actually get to choose the number of sides that you want to create your polygon with. If you choose the star tool, you have more options. If you click, you can choose not only the outside radius, but the inside radius as well, and the number of points on your star. So this gives you a lot of crazy options when it comes to creating stars. I'm actually going to show you that star tool again because I want you to see if I said my outside radius was 6 inches and my inside radius was 3 inches, and I had, let's say I put 8 points on there, and I hit OK. This is the star that I'm going to end up with. Now I'm just taking my selection tool, which causes me to select it, and I'm going to hold down my shift key and I'm going to make this star smaller so that it fits on my artboard. So when they talk about the outside radius, they're talking about where these points come to. So if I drew a circle around that part, it would be the points, how far they reached out would be that radius. And then the inside radius is going to be where these points come back in. And so if I drew a circle right here, that would be the inside radius. Okay, just so we're clear on how that works. So here's another thing that you can look at when we select this star. You can very clearly see this bounding box, whereas with the rectangle it wasn't quite as obvious. Illustrator also has this newer feature. It's pretty new, but not that new. But what happens is it's not really showing it when I excuse me, when I am showing the entire selection. But if I choose my direct selection, you'll notice that all of these little circles come up wherever I have points. And if I click and drag, what that's actually going to do is it's going to make all of my points curved. Excuse me. So I can actually create curves or points with just using those circles. Now, the thing about the direct selection tool is if I just choose that one point, I can make that curved, and I can go ahead and select other points. If I wanted to make all of these curves the same, but I wanted to just do every other one, I could click, hold down the shift key, click, select each one of the every other point, and you know they're selected when the point is filled in blue. And then I can just drag this circle down and it will create those rounded corners. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to try doing all of those things yourself. And I'm going to show you another tool. So we're going to skip over a couple of these tools, and we're going to go right to what's called the Shape Builder tool. Now we're going to need this tool when I show you the next tutorial. I am going to have this shape. I'm going to actually create another shape. So I'm going to go up to my shape tool. I'm going to choose an ellipse, and I'm going to make a perfect circle. So if you remember, we have to hold down our shift key in order to create that perfect circle. And then I'm going to move it so that it kind of takes up those 3 points in there and overlaps this other shape. Okay? So now we have this Shape Builder tool, which is over here. I call it the Dead Snowman tool, okay, because it kind of looks like a snowman on its side that maybe is getting cut in half. It's a little morbid, I know, but that's, I feel like, an easy way to remember the tool. So it's actually called the Shape Builder tool, and what that allows us to do is it allows us to put more than one shape together. So we've got these two tools, but the first thing we have to do is make sure that they're both selected. We want to use the selection tool or the black arrow. And you have two ways of doing it. You can click on one shape, hold down the shift key and click on the other shape. Or you can click and drag and it will select both shapes. So it's important to remember that whenever you're doing anything in Illustrator, you want to make sure that you have things selected. If you don't have something selected and you're trying to make changes to it, it's going to make it a little bit more difficult because it's probably not going to do what you want it to do. All right, so we've got both of our shapes selected. We're going to now choose the Shape Builder tool. And you'll notice now if you roll over your multiple shapes, what happens is they kind of turn dark gray like they've been highlighted. So in order to merge these shapes, all you have to do is click and drag a line right through it. Now I'm just going to show you that again, but I can do it any way I want. I can scribble through it. I can just draw a line straight through. I don't have to be neat or tidy about it. I can be sloppy about it. I can draw a line straight through half of them and then draw a second line through the other half, and that will give me a single shape. So now what happens is I have this single shape that was at one point two shapes, but now when I select it, you can see that it's a single shape. So I don't know if it's becoming more obvious, but this means that you can create any number of shapes by just drawing a couple of shapes and placing them together, or even just manipulating points. So I could almost start to make this look a little bit like an arrow. I can click on this and I can make this a little bit longer. And then it almost starts to become like maybe a dial on a clock or something like that. Okay. So there's lots of things that can be done with this. The next thing I want to show you is having to do with color. So right now we have an object, and if I select it, again, I know I'm selected because I have that bounding box. And I take you over here, there's two boxes. One is called your fill, and the other one is called your stroke. What that means is fill is what's on the inside of your object. So currently, because there's this white box with a red line through it, that means that there is no fill. Okay, so there's a couple ways that we can put a fill in there, but you could go over to your color panel and you can bring your eyedropper along here and choose any color that you want. You go to your swatches panel and you can choose colors that are already created for you, or maybe that you've selected yourself. Or you can also go up here to the control panel, which I told you gives you little shortcuts when it comes to choosing things and when you have certain tools selected. And you can click on a color from your swatches panel here. You can also double click on the actual fill and it will give you this dialog box, which allows you to kind of change the color and select whatever color you want. Now what's important to know is that when you're trying to change the fill or the stroke, you have to make sure that whichever one you're working with is on top. So if I click on my stroke, and that you can now see that that's overlapping my fill, which means that anything that I edit, if I change a color, it's actually changing the color of the stroke. So I'm going to just zoom in so you can see. The stroke is a little bit small, but if I change it to green or maybe some red, nope, that's not really helpful at all. Blue. But you can see that the stroke is changing color. Okay, so just in case you didn't grab that, Control plus, which it's saying equals, but it's Control plus, is zooming in, and Control minus is going to zoom out. Okay, and then if you get really zoomed in and you don't know where you are, you can always hit Command. I'm saying Control, but I mean Command 0. And that's going to bring you back to your original artboard. So if anybody is actually working on a PC, it would be Control, but if you're working on a Mac, it's Command. So we can also adjust different things with our stroke as well. So you'll notice that when we created our fill, we had to have it on top. Now if we mess around with our stroke, we want to make sure that's on top. So over here on the right hand side, you should have a panel that says stroke on it. If you don't, anytime I talk about a panel that you might need, if you go to Window, all of the panels are actually listed here. And if you don't have it, you can click on it and it should appear. If it's already open, it'll just pop open. Now, yours will probably look like this, which it tells you what the weight of the stroke is. So the stroke is the outline, and that is how thick it is. So currently mine's at 0.508, which is a random number, but I think it's because I scaled the image. So if I start increasing the stroke, what happens is my outline gets thicker. Now, you do want to click on this, what's called the fly down menu, which has a bunch of little lines. And when you click on that, it's going to say show options, and you're going to select show options. And this gives you a bunch of different options for your stroke. And I just want you to take some time to kind of mess around with these different strokes. So if at any point while you're watching this video, you're confused or I'm moving too quickly, just pause the video and do your thing and explore in the program, and then come back and finish watching the video. Or watch the video as many times as you need to, but just make sure that you're kind of getting some of what I'm saying. We're obviously going to review all of this in class when I'm with you, but I just want you to make sure that you don't get too behind during the semester and that you are getting all the information. So some of the things that we can do is we can change the alignment of our stroke. So currently there's the same amount of stroke on both sides of this blue line. This blue line is our actual path. If we click on this align stroke to the inside, it's going to move all of the stroke to the inside of that path. If we choose align stroke to the outside, it's going to move all of that stroke to the outside of that blue line, which is our path. Okay? Or you can have it centered. These are all just options. There are some fancy things like you can create a dashed line by putting in the amount of space that you want in your between the dash and the gap, which means if I change this to 10 and then my gap is 5, it'll change the orientation of your dotted line, your dashed line. You can also add arrowheads, which can be fancy sometimes, and sometimes they can be a little tacky. Depends on the situation. But they have a whole bunch of different ones here. You can also build your own. They have both the front end and the back end of an arrow, so you can create that shape and have it be an arrow. Just going to bring this back to none. And then this is actually one of my favorite features, which is the ability to change the profile of your line, which just means that you're changing whether it goes from thick to thin, whether it goes from thin to thick and then back to thin and then back to thick again. You can change it so that it just tapers off at the edges. Maybe it goes from like a hard edge to a point. So obviously, like, these are much more pronounced when it comes to doing a straight line, but they also can make some lines look more dynamic. So like in this case, it looks kind of cool that this part is thicker and this part is thinner. So sometimes instead of just kind of having that flat profile where the line is all the same width the whole way around, it can look nice if you put a little bit. I keep forgetting to select my object, which is exactly what I told you not to do. By putting that little variation in there, it can kind of add a little bit of excitement to your design. All right, so let's see. I think that's pretty much it for just our introduction. I'd like you guys to just play around with the shape tools and the line tool and messing around with color. You don't need to turn anything in for this. This is just more of like an experimental stage and learning how to maneuver around the program. Please, after you finish watching this, you're going to go and watch the tutorial that we're going to work together to create a skull and crossbones. And any feedback that you have for this video, I would actually really appreciate, because this is my first time making a video. I'm pretty sure I said too many times, but that's okay. There, I just did it again. So I look forward to meeting you all, and I hope that this video was helpful.